Hi, I'm Stephanie from Ducky, and today we're talking with Sean from Ostara Coaching. And the topic today is one that I think a lot of us can relate to, and it's about figuring things out, or better yet, the perception of there being a need to figure things out. So I'll start with a question for you, Sean. Is there anything that you feel like you have needed to figure out that has kind of been resolved a different way?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that I think there are actually a lot of things. The example that's coming to mind is relatively recent. I'm trying to think if there's one that is less recent that I could talk about. Oh, okay. I can think of one. So the example that comes to mind is my growing up. Well, I guess it's still true. My brother is conventionally attractive. And
You say this a lot. I have to meet your brother.
yeah, he's hot. And when I was growing up, I felt very insecure because while I think that, well, I didn't then, but while now I think that I'm attractive, I think that I'm attractive in a quirky way. And I was really insecure about how I looked, and I have told stories, you've probably read them, about, my, I would show someone a picture of my brother and they'd be like, that's your brother? And I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, but he's so hot. And it sucked. And I
That does
felt,
great things to one's ego, I'm sure.
yeah, exactly. And so I felt like I needed to figure out, how do I be attractive? How do I look like what everyone wants people to look like, or
Hmm.
the meta wants people to look like. And I think that when I think back on it, I didn't frame it this way at the time, but when I look back on it, I think that what ended up happening was eventually I just surrendered, or sort of gave up on figuring out
Yeah.
how to do that. And what blossomed from that was actually what ended up was actually the answer, was actually, me figuring it out of how I actually feel the most attractive. So I think that that's my example. I want to ask you if you have an experience like that. But before I
Yeah.
do, anything about that you want to talk about?
Oh my God, so much. I'll try to keep it brief. First of all, that's such a great example. And I think it's going to give us a lot to talk about, only because the things that we feel or think that we have to figure out, in my experience, are usually the things that can't be figured out.
Hmm.
And the things that we actually have agency over and can figure out, we very rarely have the I need to figure this out
Because
feeling about.
we just do. We just figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my theory.
Totally.
um, and I don't want to say less attractive sibling, but as the not immediately most attractive sibling,
Yeah.
I can relate. So yeah, I had this in common with a friend of mine who is turning 84 next week. Um, there are many, many things that don't translate over the centuries and eons of life experience, but that feeling of being like pit against a sibling, not maliciously, but she's 84 and she's still carrying this. My dad always said with so much pride and joy that he had one beautiful daughter and one brilliant daughter. And the fact that I could immediately relate to that, and I had the very same kind of experience where my sister was the pretty, outgoing, tiny, blonde, petite, and I was just the brilliant mind. um, there's a lot there, but I think in terms of figuring things out or having to figure things out, for me it's always been kind of a who do I want to be career question.
Mm.
And we've talked about my past as a executive assistant to the CEO. I think I was trying to figure out how to package being helpful and social and being a problem solver and the most palatable way to turn that into a career. And I definitely didn't pick the easiest path, but I think I picked kind of, similar to what you were saying, the the way I tried to figure it out was to do something that would be the most acceptable or the most attractive way of repackaging myself. And the cost of that is authenticity.
Yeah, and it just feels wrong. Like I remember a big part for me in trying to do it in the most attractive way was the clothing. I would try to wear clothing that was stereotypically attractive. And I felt like I was playing dress up with my dad's closet. It just felt incorrect.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I put on a piece of clothing that I felt like actually fit me. I was like, holy shit. I actually feel attractive, which is something that I'd never felt before.
Well, so that's the difference, right? There's trying to be attractive and feeling attractive, and those are two different things that also, feed into each other.
Totally. Yeah. And in a interesting way, your story sounds very similar, that it's like you tried to put on these clothes of the executive assistant, and it was just like, this doesn't fit right.
Yeah. Yeah. In an attempt to be helpful, I was actually my ability to actually help and have impact was lessened.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
Just like I'm sure in your case, trying to put on clothes to be more attractive to an external, whatever, actually lessened your ability to feel and exude that.
Yeah. In trying to shine, we dim our own spark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely. So I think I would love to kind of direct this in the path of in what ways have you kind of witnessed this outside of yourself?
I mean, I really think that a concept that has become increasingly important for me, sort of within this realm, is the idea that I talked about of surrender. That so many people hold on so tightly to things that don't feel right to them, that when I guess it's a little bit of a multi-step process. Usually for me, when I'm working with people, it starts with just identifying you don't like, I'm going to use my example. You don't like these clothes. Why are you wearing them?
Right.
And then just starting to go through that and sort of validating, oh, it makes sense that you want to wear those clothes because you want to be attractive, but it sounds like it doesn't actually accomplish that for you. And so then eventually getting to the point of, okay, I'm the surrender of I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm not gonna wear those clothes or whatever. And when you get to that point, then a whole universe opens up of options and possibilities that has been cut off by the commitment to this one solution or idea.
Yeah.
What about you? What kind of places do you see this outside yourself?
I see this a lot with my clients that are kind of very, very aware of the inflection point or the thing that's causing them to crave change. So there are people who come to me and say, something's got to give, and I don't know what it is, but there's something that's off in the balance. And those people generally have a little bit more of an easy path to surrender.
Yeah.
Because they're already in this not knowing place. So there's already possibility and ambiguity. If someone comes to me because of a specific thing that they feel that they are kind of identifying as the thing that they're trying to overcome, and it could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be a divorce, it could be a car accident, it could be, so many things. The birth of a child doesn't always have to be something negative, but just something that is like a big inflection point, something that has changed their sense of self. It's harder to guide them to surrender because they are kind of attached to this idea, or like you said, committed to this thing being the thing that needs to change.
Yeah.
And it's harder to work around that.
As you were talking about it, one of the sort of topics that I feel like is often people feel like they need to figure it out is spirituality, actually. Is that a lot of people are like, and I think that for me, the idea of purpose falls under spirituality. And that's one Absolutely. that I hear a lot is I need to know what my purpose is. I need to figure that out. And
well, that has been sold to us.
Yep.
As the silver bullet. If you know your purpose, everything falls in alignment. You'll meet the love of your life. You'll be, young forever. It's just this amazing thing. And now buy my, package of how to find your purpose. So I don't think we all have this innate need to zero in on our purpose. I think it's been sold to us as the ultimate solution.
And what's interesting is that in a weird way, I kind of agree in that, and I think you do too, in that, and let me know if I'm wrong, in that when you are in alignment, which is essentially synonymous in my mind with sort of finding your purpose, when you are in alignment, everything does sort of click into place. It is sort of a silver bullet. But I think that they're selling us like processed purpose. They're selling us purpose. Yeah, they're actually selling us goals, not purpose.
Yeah.
So it actually does the opposite of what it's advertised as.
Yeah. I would take something that you said and just refine it a little bit.
Totally.
That feeling of being in alignment.
Yeah.
And doing things on purpose is very different than like identifying a purpose and then doing things to be in alignment with that, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that the thing that we might be running into is that, like I said, I think most people's idea of purpose or definition of purpose is very different from how I think about it. And so, how do I say this?
Well, like to use your example of the clothes and like putting on certain clothes to be attractive. I think that idea of purpose is like, you running out and putting on a 3-piece suit and being like, okay, now I found my purpose. And then inside you're like, this is so weird.
This feels so wrong.
This feels so wrong.
Right.
But this is my purpose, and then trying to do things that are in alignment with that purpose, even though it doesn't really fit you.
Right. Yeah.
Versus putting on something that you feel really good in and going, oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the nuance for me, is that to me, purpose is actually an action. The way that you phrased it is I think a different way of saying the same thing, which is doing it on purpose. That does make sense. And so then,
and the spirituality component, I think, is really important there, because that's the discernment, that's the recognition, that like spirit sense of, oh, this is for me. This feels not appropriate, but this feels good.
I think it comes back to something that we were talking about earlier of that it sort of naturally leads you there. Spirituality will naturally lead you there unless you try to control the
Subvert
river,
it.
which will then inevitably mess things up. Unless you try to figure things out.
Right.
And so one thing that I'd like to address, this might be a good sort of last thing to cover, is I can imagine an objection to this being life is hard. You have to work hard to get what you want in life. And if I just surrender and don't try to figure anything out, then I'm going to wind up, eating potato chips off my chest and being freaking miserable. Because, so like, what would you say to that?
Have you tried it the hard way? Has that worked out for you? I mean, that's what I tell myself all the time. Whenever I go into these spirals of I need to figure it out,
Yeah.
I always come back to, well, how's that working out for you?
Sure.
And not in a malicious way, but in a very compassionate, caring, like let's just drop in. How does that feel in your body? How's that working out?
Yeah. Stephanie, I do love how much of a savage you are. And I know that you don't even mean it savagely.
I don't mean it. That's the worst part.
But you are just like somebody comes and is like, yeah, right, like none of that's gonna work because blah blah blah, and you're like, yeah, how's that working out for you? And it's just like, now I feel small.
I mean, it's effective. I think the reason I am that way is because that's what I need.
Sure. You need some savagery.
If somebody was just like giving me an easy way out, I would take it. So I'm that way with my clients because it's what works. The people that feel gravitated, that feel the pull to work with me, they don't need like gentle hand holding. And I am so about giving my clients permission. I'm so about creating and holding space for them to choose surrender. Yeah. But it has to be their choice.
Right. And how do you distinguish between being a sheep that just sort of follows the railroad track and the kind of surrender that we're talking about?
It's a readiness. I think that's why we have this kind of, spiritual and the connection and the outlook to spirituality. It's a come to Jesus moment, if you want to use that terminology. It's one of the reasons, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in another conversation, why it's so hard to promote this work. Until the person is really ready to look at this stuff, there is no there there. There's no way to get to that point of readiness until you're ready.
And so then, yeah.
And for some people, it takes a big inflection point, something that really challenges their belief.
Well,
for other people, they just get bored.
Eating
potato chips off their chest.
as I was playing devil's advocate, as I was listening to you, I realized the beautiful meta that happened, which is I was like, well, yeah, but so what? Like, I can't just figure it out. Like, I just have to sit here and take it until, and then it's like, oh, I'm trying to figure it out. Oh no, I have to surrender.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Really cool.
And I think it's an especially tough pill to swallow for us who haven't been, blessed from the outset with people just coming and giving us solutions and acknowledging our superiority and attractiveness just of, God given.
Totally.
It can be really hard. It can be really hard to trust that letting go is the right thing, or the best kind of possible outcome. I don't want to say right, because it's not about right or wrong, but the figuring it out is a maladaptive strategy.
Yeah.
It's what kept us safe. And that's where the how is that working out for you really comes into play, because if it's still working, if it's still keeping you safe, then you might not want to let go of it yet.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Right. Then it's just adaptive, in which case, keep doing it. Coping mechanisms exist for a reason.
But if it's not working out for you and you're still holding on to it, then there's no figuring out. Then there's just letting it go.
Yep. Yep. I think that's cherry on top. I think it's perfect. I think it's great. All right. Any last?
You'll find your way to surrender. There's no way to figure it out.
Yeah. Ooh, man. Even me, like when you say there's no way to figure it out, my chest pounds. My chest is like, no, I don't like that. And so I can only imagine how frustrating it is for people to hear. And I think that that's the for me personally, like my own experience and what I've witnessed in clients. That's what's so freaking beautiful and feels so freaking good about surrender, is that you don't that tension that I felt in my chest, I think is the residual of having to always figure it out and hold on, and to be able to let that go and just float is truly blissful.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that I always kind of keep coming back to whenever I really catch myself in this like attachment to wanting to figure something out. Nothing that you want is upstream. Right? So you can be really good at fighting the current. You can be exceptional at getting upstream and going against your felt senses, because you've learned that is a safe way to navigate your world. But nothing you want is upstream.
Yeah. Poor salmon, you know?
Well, I'm sure this is a different audience.
Yeah, we're not speaking to salmon. But it just, we're so lucky.
They get what they want and then they die immediately. So we're talking to the salmon.
And with that, have a great day, everybody.
That is the most inspirational thing we could put out there.